36 is the last one on the pilgrimage. Obviously a very, very important pillar of Islam. And there is a little bit of repetition because of, we're going into a little bit more detail. At the time, last time, we'll be talking about some of the origins. We'll be making some comparisons between Judaism and Islam, and getting into some details about the scope of this whole pillar. First of all, just a few thoughts about the comparisons with Judaism. Daniel was, remember Daniel and his experiences when he was in exile, thinking and praying towards Jerusalem, and others, and in fact, Jews had their pilgrimages. They had their pilgrimages to Jerusalem. Remember, Jesus himself went at the age of 12. The Jews, of course, had their offerings and their sacrifices they did. The Jews, like the Muslims, consider shoes unclean, so they take them off in the worship. And we talked about before how that one becomes a Jew by reciting the Shema from Deuteronomy 6 and the Shahada as a Muslim. So lots of comparisons. Also in reference to hair, remember that Paul shaved his hair when he took a Nazirite vow. Remember Samson, in his respect, it wasn't shaving it, but it was not shaving it. When the Muslims start their pilgrimage, the men shave their hair, and not only on their head. Of course, a good Muslim shaves the hair all over his or her body, except the beard in reference to men, and women don't shave their head, of course. The other thing is that we could mention too are that in Psalm 26 and verse 6, it says something about going about your altar. So the impression is that they were circling around it. As reference to the Kaaba, they do circle around it in a counterclockwise 7 times. I'm not exactly sure why it's counterclockwise, but that's the rule. And the pilgrimage is an obligation, but I would say again that it's an obligation if you can afford it. But many Muslims do it at great sacrifice, because Muslims most of them are not wealthy at all. So I think 60% of the world's poor are Muslim, and we have to keep that in mind when we think of the fact that Islam is growing so much biologically. They're having big families. Well, the truth is that oftentimes the poor can't afford anything else. In other words, that's the way the poor operate. They don't have access to birth control, and 60% of the world's poor are Muslim. This whole procedure predates Islam. The pilgrimage. In other words, it was there before Muhammad. The pilgrimage to Mecca. In that case, there was the Kaaba, and there were 360 gods in the Kaaba. And then Muhammad cleaned it out, and he cleansed it in 630. The tradition is that he left he left a picture of Jesus and Mary. But the pilgrimage is there, and the Quran says that there was a lot of excess and a lot of nonsense, whistling, and says in Quran 34 and 35, they had this, and there was at the sacred mosque, and it wasn't, the prayer at the house, it says verse 35 is nothing but whistling and clapping of hands. So I don't know what all they did, but Islam looks at this as the spirit, the age of Jahiliyyah, the darkness. And the commentator says that at the bottom of this passage, number 1205, that pagans used to go around naked. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what he says. It would be interesting to look into this to see how factual that is. In the Quran, it says in 2, this is a little mistake on the typo there, it's 126. 126 to 128. Remember, Abraham said, "My Lord, make the city of peace and free and feed his people with fruits, such of them, and believe in Allah on the last day." And then 127, remember Abraham and Ismail raised the foundations of the house with this prayer, "O our Lord, accept the service from us." So you see, Adam built it, Abraham repaired it, and with his son Ishmael. "Our Lord, make of us Muslims bowing to thy will, and of our progeny a people, Muslim, bowing to thy will, and show us our places for the celebration of Ududu rites, and turn unto us in mercy, for thou art oft returning, most merciful." You see, Muhammad was the one who instituted this, in other words, as it's done today. And one tradition says that when Umar, the second, actually was Muhammad, and Ali, and then Umar, as far as the caliphs. Caliph, when he saw the kissing of the black stone and one thing and another, he said, "I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it except I saw Muhammad doing it." So that's, again, Muhammad did it. So Muhammad founds the rite. He is the founder. And, I'm sorry, Abraham founded the rite according to the Quran, and Muhammad carries on. This is a picture, not too clear, that one of my students did, who was an artist, and she was obviously copying from another picture, but showing people, be it ever so dimly, reaching up in an attempt to touch the black stone. You can't see it, but some of them are kissing it. Particularly an old person would want to get the full blessing. And incidentally, old people would like to die in Mecca, because if they can die in Mecca, then there is a chance of their going to heaven. Otherwise, there's no assurance at all. Here is a close-up of someone kissing the black stone. This is, got his head right in there. So the merit would be by kissing it, not just touching it or waving at it. The place where this is done, as we've said, is Mecca, and it is a sacred site. In other words, the whole area is sacred. You can't get in there as a non-Muslim. It's forbidden, and it's called haram. This word haram is a funny word because it sort of has double meaning. On the one hand, haram means sacred. On the other hand, it's forbidden. So it's sort of like some words that we have in English, like the word cleave. Cleave means come together, but it also means to split apart. So this word haram, this area is haram. It's sacred. Only Muslims are allowed. And as they come in to the area, they get into the area before they get even to the city of haram, and they then must start being patient, and they must start acting the way that they're supposed to, unless they spoil the whole thing and then have to go back and start over again. The Grand Mosque is about 750 by 750 feet, I understand. I haven't been there, obviously, though there's some non-Muslims have gotten in. I remember a guy by the name of Sir Richard Burton, who got in there many, many years ago as pretending to be a dervish. And then obviously was knighted by the Queen, not because he got in there, but then he wrote a couple of volumes on it, on his experiences. This would not be the Richard Burton we know, but the one earlier than that, Sir Richard Burton. The Kaaba itself is 54 by 42 by 34 feet high. Nothing inside, but understand that there are tunnels and one thing and another underneath the Kaaba. And in the northeast corner, there is this black stone that we've talked about before. In the area, there are 4 Sunni schools of law. In other words, the Sunnis have agreed to disagree on some issues, which is pretty commendable. In other words, it shows that Muslims can come to terms. They don't demand that everyone see the same and agree to everything that one thing. So they have 4 schools of law, and they're all represented there. These 4 schools of law have found are actually put in force in different parts of the Muslim world. Hanafi, for example, in the South Asia continent, in the Sub-India continent, Hanbali in Saudi Arabia and other parts, and Malaki in parts of Africa, and then the Shafi. 4 schools of law are all represented there. It is the traditional burial place of Hagar and Ishmael. That means a lot. Ishmael being the son that Abraham was willing to sacrifice, and Hagar, his wife. There is Zamzam water there, well there, as I mentioned before, and Hagar supposedly running back and forth in pursuit of water. I have spoken on how God reaches out to women of the well in the Old Testament. Hagar was one of them, and God does speak to her. If you look in the book of Genesis, and she sees him, she says, "He is now. I've seen the one who sees me," and so she has some kind of an experience when she is, I think, pushed out unfairly and unjustly by Abraham and Sarah. Now, the procedure is in the class notes. We can't go over it too carefully because of the time it takes, but it does tell you what you do day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4, day 5, and by day 6. Day 1 is the day of deliberation. In other words, this is the 8th day of the 12th month of the 12th month of the lunar calendar. You call us here, O God. We are here. Praise and good deeds belong to you and the empire. There is none by you, but you. So the Muslims, you see, they're saying this. Here we are, God. Here we are. And then they proceed by reciting the Talbiyah. I'm waiting for the service of God. There's no partner with thee. 2 times. They arrive in the holy city. They do their ablutions. They go through the gates of peace. They go around the Kaaba 7 times counterclockwise in what they call the Tawuf. And there's the station of Abraham. They do their prayers there, the 2 rakahs. They drink water from Zamzam. And then the pilgrim runs between the 2 hills, As-Safa and Al-Marwa. Obviously, if they're really old, they can hardly run. So they sort of just do the best they can, going back and forth between those 2 stones. Now, here is a little bit as to the, I should have said that if we look at day 2, that's the day of Arafat, and we've already talked about that in the last lecture. Day 3 is the day of sacrifice, and they do various things there and reject Satan and so on. Remember that this sacrifice, this Qurban, as the word is, Eid al-Adha, the big Eid, the great sacrifice. It reminds me of Jesus, isn't it, in John, where on that day, that great day of the feast, where he speaks out and says so clearly, I am, he says, whoever is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. And they reject him. They reject him. But they understand that the day of Arafat to be the highlight of the Hajj. And then day 3, the day of sacrifices, I mentioned, we're all over the Muslim world there offering sacrifices. And when they're throwing stones, they always, I think it's 49 stones, if I'm not mistaken, pebbles. But there was some disagreement in the movie we saw. Some say 49, some say more. They couldn't agree on how many stones that you're supposed to pick up. The days 4 through 6 are the days of drying meat. Now look at just a little bit more here on the steps of the Hajj. It's a mistake here in the spelling. It's not J, it should be Ihram. Up to 14 days before the Hajj is the day of being cleansing. In other words, cleansing physically and spiritually, ready for this, preparing yourself. And the ta'awuf at the holy mosque is before the Hajj. Once arriving in Mecca, pilgrims walk counterclockwise. We've already said that. Encampment at Mina, the first day of the Hajj and the 8th day of Dhul al-Hijjah. Pilgrims gather in the valley of Mina to pray and meditate in preparation for the next day. And then Waquf, standing in Arafat. I've already talked about this. I have heard 10 miles. Here it says 10 kilometers out on the plains of Arafat. It doesn't really matter. From noon until sundown, there's a reflect and pray for mercy and renewal. That is the highlight. And again, you see people with tears in their eyes. Muzdalifa, the second night. And then we won't read this every part of it, but the stoning of Satan, they throw pebbles at the 3 pillars representing Satan, symbolic representation of Abraham. You see how he rejected Satan when asked to sacrifice his son. Satan, the story is that Satan said, no, don't do that, don't worry about that. And then after that, they sacrificed the sheep. Some would sacrifice a camel, and it's the feast of sacrifice. Then number 7 there, in steps of the Hajj, they return to the holy mosque any time during those days, and they circle it. They pass through sort of the gate again, and so it's quite an experience. And then departure up to 14 days after the Hajj. To ease the crowds, some do not leave Mecca and Saudi Arabia. Some groups go north to Medina. And I might say that that's more common than we might think, because in Medina is the grave of Prophet Muhammad. And given the attachment Muslims have to shrines, to burial places, that is really a very, very important thing. And a lot of people do that. They either go there at the time of the Hajj during the 12th month, or they go there some other time during some kind of a mini Hajj. And I think what happens in Medina is sort of a paradigm of what happens all over the Muslim world in reference to saints, because Muslims are pretty fond of visiting the tombs of saints. We'll talk about that later in the course. They call them pirs. They go there for blessing. They go there for needs to be met, and so on. So here is just another map. We've already looked at the chart. We've already looked at this one. But remembering that Muslims have 3 holy sites. There is Mecca, of course, and there's Medina, and then there is Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. That is a sticky point because Muslims lay claim to that. The reason they do is that tradition has it that when Muhammad made his night journey from Mecca to heaven, he stopped off at Jerusalem. In other words, there were 2 legs to the journey as he was traveling on this animal called al-Buraq. It wasn't a horse, it wasn't a donkey, but it did have wings, looked like sort of a mule. And then he stopped off, and the tradition has it that the footprints of this animal are there. And then he went on up to the 7 heavens, one after the other, meeting the prophets and including Jesus. So here you have another graphical picture of Muslims as they are there in the Hajj. There are tremendous figures here. Gives an idea of the total number of pilgrims in 2002, well over 2 million. 45% were women, and more than 1.5 million of them were from outside Saudi Arabia. Almost 200,000 in Indonesia. 182,000 were Saudis, and many of them are from Saudi are not, they're non-residents. In other words, there are a lot of foreign workers. So obviously there is an increase of pilgrims, and there are, of course, flights. This is quite a business, really. Just imagine all of the flights of people bringing of the planes bringing in pilgrims. There are tents that are set up there. The total says here 43,200 tents, all made of fireproof Teflon coated fiberglass. They have had in the past fires there would break out, and you know, somebody using a gas stove or something blow up and people burned to death, and 20% stay in their own tents or hotels. It there talks about the size of the Minna Valley. Over 2 million gallons of water are misted into the valley, I guess to cool people off, because it's a hot place. The average speed of the 3.3 million people moving from Arafat to Muzdalifah Khalifa, forgive the spelling mistakes, is very slow, you see, because of the crowd. And some time of the journey, they're all night. Some of them are walking all night or in the bus, whatever. 16% of them are walking rather than taking the bus. The Holy Mosque is 20 times bigger than St. Peter's Basilica, so you could see how big it is. It fits 5 times more than the largest stadium in Rio de Janeiro. 3 floors are used for prayer in the Holy Mosque. 1,330 workers check animals for qualifications for the sacrifice. And then well over 1 million goats and sheep are brought for sale. 1,200,000. That's a lot of goats and sheep. Here it talks about the sacrifices. 50% of the meat is shipped globally, which is pretty remarkable because they didn't used to be able to do this. Government regulated price of the reserved sheep is $131.57. 10 million meals are served commercially, 2 million by charities and so on. 550 garbage trucks in Mecca, working 24/7 during the Hajj, and 14,000 cleaning up and so on. So it's quite a thing. And lastly, the Saudi government wants to increase accommodation by 50% in the next 6 years. So obviously the Saudi government is going to be very, very busy expanding, and they're working at this all the time.